President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed the Public Procurement Bill into law. The Act seeks to address weaknesses in the procurement of goods and services by organs of state that have in the past enabled various degrees of corruption, including state capture. To talk more about how the Public Procurement Act will enhance the health and pharmaceutical sector, this is of course post the 21st African Growth and Opportunity Act Forum, which was held in Washington D.C. in the United States recently. We're joined by Dr Stavros Nicolaou. He's the Group Senior Executive of Strategic Trade at Aspen Pharmacare Holdings Limited. So good to have you here on the program, Stavros. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Leanne, and thanks very much for having me.
Fantastic. So let's start off with having a look and seeing, recently, of course, we saw that the President went ahead, as I said in the introduction, and signed into law the Public Procurement Bill to regulate public procurement. What are your views on this act as the pharmaceutical sector?
Firstly, let me say that this act is, firstly, long overdue. It's a very important instrument or lever in industrializing our country, in accelerating transformation. The public sector spends around 1.4 trillion rand on the procurement of goods and services. Of course, some of that is directed towards salaries and remuneration benefits. But by our estimate, around 800 billion rand of that is spent on public procurement. So it's an important lever in addressing both transformation and also industrialization in our country. Now, why is industrialization so important? The obvious thing here is manufacturing creates significant and sustainable jobs, both up and downstream. And the fact that we had a suspended act, as some of the viewers might know, the act was previously, the regulations to the act were previously set aside, and it required a longer-term overhaul of the entirety of the act, and this is what we now have. So we're in a good space with respect to what exists in statute. However, the proof is always in the pudding, and that is the extent to which the various line ministries that are responsible for procurement in our country will comply to the Act. Of course, they'll be required to do so, but there is some detail that still needs to be worked out. Now, how does that benefit the pharmaceutical industry? The pharmaceutical industry is a significant procurer or supplier of medicines to the state. There are 11 different tenders. The antiretroviral tender, which has actually just been released now, is in fact the largest of those tenders. And it would be critical to get some alignment with the National Department of Health ahead of the award of this tender with respect to application of the various tenets of the Act to this tender and all the other tenders for that matter. Yeah. And of course, as I said, this doesn't only apply to the pharmaceutical sector. This would cut across the entirety of our economy. And certainly what we would call for here is a rapid and swift implementation of the Act so that we can accelerate industrialization, manufacturing in our country, and with manufacturing comes economic growth and job creation.
Which is at the heart and center of it all, but there's more to it as well, because, I mean, we've seen it, and it's, as you say, this is not necessarily only in the pharmaceutical sector, but because you're in it, so this is where your strong point is. But the reality is it affects everything, and this Public Procurement Act addresses the weaknesses in the procurement of goods and services by organs of state that have, in the past, and we've seen this in a massive way, enabled various degrees of corruption. We've come through a time of state capture. And I suppose what South Africans would like to know, and is this how we can address this, and perhaps maybe we could look into it, how the Act will actually stop the challenge of corruption and cost-effective procurement in goods, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry.
So the Act achieves many different things. I mean, I've just spoken about the industrialization element of it. And, let me just say that public procurement bills and or acts of this nature are not unique to South Africa, incidentally. I've just come back from Egypt a few weeks back, and Egypt has been able to localize their pharmaceutical sector in volume terms by 91%. So that means 91% of what can be produced, because of course you can't produce everything, but 91% of what can be produced in Egypt, pharmaceutically speaking, is now produced in that country. And that's been in a short space of about 4 to 5 years. So these levers or instruments, as I call them, are not unique to our country. But we need to ensure, as I said earlier, rapid and swift implementation. Now, the other thing, as you correctly cite, and that the Act sets out to achieve, is greater transparency and accountability, because public procurement, as we know in our country, has been fraught with corruption, and corruption takes many forms and shapes. I mean, one of the areas that perhaps is less spoken about is the fronting that takes place in these tenders, where scorecards are manipulated. You almost hire a black shareholder or a black employee, and you masquerade your company as being empowered, and you present your bid and you successfully win the bid. So fronting is another form of corruption, and we're really hopeful that with the amendments that have been made to what is now the Act, of course, that there will be a significant reduction and hopefully one day even elimination of all of these bad practices, which have not only hampered industrialization, job creation and economic growth, but have also seen legitimate black suppliers and or black industrialists. We really need to use this as a lever for black industrialists. We've seen both black entrepreneurs and black industrialists being at the receiving end of this because of the fronting. So what we need here is legitimate bidders who are actually committed and invested in South Africa, for them to participate in an appropriate and effective way to boost economic growth through this lever of public procurement.
So this AGOA, because I just want to spend a bit of time as well speaking about AGOA. You were also a part of the South African delegation that attended the 21st African Growth and Opportunity Act in Washington. How does it also talk to what the Public Procurement Act actually seeks to achieve?
Our vision as a country is to grow our economy through industrialization, and implicit in that is to reorientate towards exports, so that we export products that earns hard currency for the country. These are value-added products, what we call additive manufacturing, which when you start exporting to a variety of geographies around the world, is also significant in terms of job creation and also economic growth. But Leanne, charity always starts here at home. So we require our domestic market to be the platform or the springboard, if you will, into exports. So if you don't have domestic economies of scale, you're not going to succeed in export markets. So there is a direct link between the Public Procurement Bill and what AGOA sets out to achieve. AGOA is an export opportunity, a very attractive one for African countries, and South Africa in particular has been the biggest exporter to the United States of non-oil based products. So we're the largest as far as exports go to the US. So arguably we've been a great beneficiary of AGOA. And part of the visit, in fact, the primary objective of the visit was to put a strong case, a business case for Africa and for South Africa for the renewal and reauthorization of AGOA I think many of the viewers will know that AGOA comes up for review. It has about another 16 months to run.
Yeah.
And what we were seeking here is an expeditious renewal and reauthorization of AGOA so that we can continue this partnership with the United States. The US is a very important trade and investment partner for South Africa, and AGOA is certainly the nexus to that partnership, and very important that we get its renewal and that we even increase the representation of sectors and benefits that are contained in the AGOA agreement. We're seeking a 16-year renewal, which would take us to 2040. So that was part of the objective, and I might suggest that very positive signals were sent by our US counterparts. That's right through from the US administration, Congress and the Senate, and also the private sector sent very strong signals that they value this partnership and would like to see it renewed. But of course, it's only, as they say in the classics, when a fat lady sings, only then will it be past the post, Leanne. But certainly some very positive signals. But we need to sort out our own domestic policies.
Yeah.
And public procurement is really important to give critical mass, economies of scale for our manufacturers. Pharmaceuticals came up and enjoyed a session on its own, a session that I spoke at, and there is significant discussions going on with PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Fund for AIDS relief, for PEPFAR to eventually start procuring antiretrovirals from South Africa and other parts of Africa. So these are all important developments. But if you lose tenders in South Africa, you don't have that volume, then you're not going to be competitive to export.
Yeah.
So we need to align all these policies and all these instruments in order for our country to succeed. So public procurement, health department procuring domestically here in South Africa, and us exporting to jurisdictions like the African continent and the United States would mean all the stars aligning, and then we will feel it in terms of job creation and economic growth in our country.
So as you say, obviously this is, it seemed good, the sentiments were good, the vibes were good, but obviously behind and underlying all of this is a bit of a worry, particularly on South Africa's stance on certain issues, whether it be our position on the Israeli-Palestinian war, our membership and support of BRICS and bringing Russia into the equation. So that's always got a question mark of our inclusion. However, there's also the prospect that, in November, we may have a new president in the form of a Republican Donald Trump, and many worrying that this may also serve as a big deterrent to AGOA and, where we go with this. Was this spoken about at all? I don't imagine in a public forum, but was there a little bit of concern as to what may happen come these elections and the trajectory or path that America take going forward?
Leanne, let me handle the latter issue first. Our engagements were across the administration, and certainly Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was extremely positive on AGOA in its renewal. I think falling just short of basically saying we're going to do it right, but the signals were very strong from him. So our idea here was, and the delegation was very ably led by Minister Parks-Tau and Deputy Minister Andrew Whitfield, and they certainly put a strong case, as did the officials, for South Africa. Our engagements were bipartisan, however, so that means we spoke to Republicans and Democrats, both within the administration and also, the administration is a Democrat administration, but within the Congress and the Senate, senators and congressmen that were met were bipartisan. They were both Republican and or Democrats. So we were able to present a case to both. Of course, there are some concerns around some of the postures that South Africa has taken historically, but this presented an opportunity to explain all of these things, and certainly in some of the discussions that I was a participant in. I think the United States doesn't have an expectation that we now concede our sovereignty or independence. That's not the expectation. I think it's perhaps the way some of these things get portrayed and or positioned in the public domain. And I think that we were also very clear that we both entities stand to gain significant amounts in a partnership, and a lot of the conversation was correctly anchored around the business, economic, and investment angles of the partnership. So AGOA is anchored in trade and investment, and certainly our American counterparts are seeing opportunities in Africa for their own companies. They see a strong link between AGOA and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So we were able to explain the Free Trade Area. The Free Trade Area Secretary General, Wamkele Meni, was present and a prominent speaker in a number of panels. So these were all good developments, because I think how you work through these perceived or real, if I can call it pinch points in any relationship, is you need to sit across the table and dialogue. You need to sit in the various fora and or breakaway sessions, and that's what we did very successfully, I believe.
Excellent. Stavros, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you. Thank you very, very much for giving us the update on AGOA, how it's looking, the visit that he was part of with the ministries, and also, of course, looking at that public procurement bill that was signed into law.